Good evening. If you can hear me, clap once. Look at that. Some of you, almost there. Good evening. My name is Reverend Tyler Thompson, and I have the privilege of serving as the senior minister here of Zionsville Christian Church. And I like to welcome folks every Sunday, as I will welcome you now by saying, welcome to Zionsville Christian Church. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, God delights in you, and you are welcome here. This congregation has a nearly 190-year history in the village of Zionsville as being a congregation that puts, let's say, curiosity over certainty. We are a congregation of inquisitive minds, believing that God gave you a brain and expects for you to use it. And we are an intellectually curious bunch. And you are joining in being a curious bunch by coming to hear Sheila Kennedy. Sheila is the first of the 2025 speaker series speakers. And Sheila is going to talk for 30 seconds tonight on the topic of what is the rule of law and why does it matter? And Sheila will simply sum it up, Cliff's Notes version, by saying because it does and because it should. And I'm grateful that Sheila is here tonight. A little bit of a teaser, and that is to say that in July we have officially booked our second speaker in the speaker series, none other than Andrew Whitehead, who will be coming to speak with us about the danger of Christian nationalism. Nevertheless, Sheila Kennedy is here with us tonight, and I could not be more proud to hand this acrylic pulpit over to her. Welcome. Let's welcome Sheila.
Oh, she's short, too. Very short. Well, thank you. Boy, this is lovely. Those of you who read my blog know that I refer a lot to the rule of law, how important it is and how very negative the consequences are when governments ignore or violate it. What I don't do often enough is explain what the rule of law is and why it's the absolute bedrock of democratic governance. Depending on how you count it, there are seven essential elements that altogether make up what we call the rule of law. Now, you've all undoubtedly heard the first, the one that's most often cited by scholars and lawyers and pundits. That's legal supremacy, which means that the law, the same law, applies to everyone. Another way to say that is no one is above the law. The importance of equal application of the law to everyone ought to be obvious. If elected or appointed officials weren't restrained by the law, if we, the people, had to obey the laws, but those in authority didn't have to, the result would be what we lawyer types like to call arbitrary and capricious behavior by government officials. And they would be free to use their authority in unfair and unjust ways. You might think of some local or not local, but some current examples. That's the way monarchs used to behave. In democratic countries pledged to the rule of law, we don't have kings who are free to ignore the rules that the rest of us live by. Now, the second element, and this is why I say that depending on how you count it, because you might think of this as being part of the first, if the law applies to everyone, then everyone is entitled to equality before the law. In an ideal rule of law system, which I'm compelled to admit we've never had, everyone would have equal access to and equal treatment under the law of the land. Things like social status, wealth, elective office, and popular or unpopular political beliefs would not affect access to or operation of the legal system or the process and the way in which the laws are applied to individuals. The rule of law requires us to work toward a system in which laws and legal procedures are applied to all of us equally and without favoritism. And we've always had a long way to go, but we seem to be going further away from that. To take an example from the headlines, a government accusation that someone is a bad actor or a gang member or a threat to America cannot, in a rule of law system, relieve the government of its obligation to demonstrate the validity of those accusations in a court of law, and to do so before they can punish that individual. That's what's meant by due process of law, and due process is absolutely foundational to a fair and impartial legal system. The third element of the rule of law is accountability. In other words, we the people are entitled to know what our government's doing and whether it's functioning in a constitutionally appropriate manner. In the United States, a major element of accountability is built into our constitutional structure, what most of us learned in high school as checks and balances, the division of legal authority among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of our government. We're now seeing what happens to accountability and the rule of law when one branch of our government fails or refuses to exercise the powers granted to it under the Constitution, when the legislative branch allows the executive to appropriate and abuse powers that have been vested in the legislature. Future historians, assuming, of course, that we have them, will identify that cowardly failure as a rejection of both elective responsibility and the rule of law, and a betrayal of the Constitution and of the individual legislator's oath of office. I was talking to some of you here, and my sister participated in a protest at Todd Young's office the other day, and she has a walker, and she put a sign on her walker that said, "My spine isn't good, but I have one." We have a good family. The fourth element of the rule of law is its application by a fair and independent judiciary. Now, there's a reason that federal judges have lifetime appointments, because the founders believed that judges should be shielded from political passions and reprisals, that they should be able to apply the law and the facts as they see them, free of pressure or bias. That judicial independence recently came under unprecedented attack when ICE arrested a Wisconsin judge who failed to knuckle under to demands to turn over a defendant in her courtroom. If judges can be arrested for disagreeing with the executive branch about their authority, in this case this was evidently because the judge found that ICE had the wrong kind of warrant, we no longer have checks and balances, and we no longer have the rule of law. You know, the founders' goal of judicial independence remains very important. But it is true that in today's America, we've encountered a consequence to those lifetime appointments that the founders did not foresee. We all live a whole lot longer than they used to live, and there's consequently a lot less judicial turnover, especially at the Supreme Court level. That concern is heightened by evidence that at least 2 members of the current High Court are, shall we say, ethically compromised. The lower federal courts, on the other hand, have been functioning properly. Those courts have issued a number of important decisions upholding the rule of law and restraining Trump's flood of unlawful and unconstitutional executive orders. Unfortunately, within the legal community, there's substantial concern about the degree to which our compromised Supreme Court will uphold those lower court decisions. And should it fail to do so, we really do risk losing the rule of law. If we end up emerging from what I think is a terrifying time, with our legal system largely intact, imposing an 18-year term limit on Supreme Court justices, as many scholars have suggested, would achieve the founders' goal of insulating jurists from political pressure while also minimizing the risks of judicial senility. And if the legislature once again operated properly, judges shown to be ethically compromised could be impeached. There's lots of ifs in that paragraph. The fifth element of the rule of law is something we call certainty. Laws have to be clear and understandable in order to allow citizens to know what behaviors are expected of them. When you read that a law has been found void for vagueness, it's because some legislative edict has failed to clearly set out what behavior is being banned or required. Certainty also requires a fair amount of continuity and predictability, meaning that legislators should avoid frequent and dramatic changes in the laws that make it hard for citizens to keep abreast of their responsibilities. The sixth element, again, is implied by others. All citizens must have access to the legal system, to the means of redress. That means all of us are entitled to legal representation and to fair trials with impartial judges. And finally, the seventh element echoes the protections in America's Bill of Rights. The rule of law must protect the rights that have been found to be essential to human liberty, what we call human rights. As I used to tell my students, it's important to recognize that the Bill of Rights does not confer rights on Americans. It forbids government from interfering with the inalienable rights that are ours by virtue of our humanity. Those basic rights include freedom of speech and religion, the right to due process, the freedom to go about our business without arbitrary interference, freedom from excessive, cruel, or unusual punishments, the right to trial by jury, the right to be treated equally by our government. In other words, the right to live under a regime that respects the rule of law. Now, everything I've said so far has revolved around long-standing notions of fairness and morality. But I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that there are also some very practical reasons for supporting the rule of law. Mountains of scholarly research have confirmed that countries where the rule of law is established and respected are more stable and have much more robust economies. As we're seeing, uncertainty and chaos are bad for business. Attacks on the rule of law, like those we are currently experiencing, destroy trust in government, undermine our economy, and promote conflict and violence. No government is perfect, and ours certainly can be improved. But improvements have to be made within the Constitution, with fidelity to the Constitution and to the rule of law, not from the willful destruction of the underlying philosophy of this country, a philosophy that I call the American idea. It's that idea, that philosophical framework, that insistence on the primacy of the rule of law that has fostered social progress, and that is what has really made America great. It's up to we the people to protect that. Thank you. I probably exceeded my 30 seconds, but I'm happy to take questions. I've beaten you all into submission, haven't I? No questions? Okay. Why, what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What wasn't? Well, I sense in that question a frustration that I share. I mean, uh, it is true that in our country, people with lots of resources can evade legal accountability for a long time. I think there, in all fairness, there was a feeling that the courts were going to bend over backwards to be fair to this person who has a cult following, after all. And, but no, he should have been treated like any other felon. I agree with you. You know, when we talk about the ideals of the rule of law, we can't close our eyes to the fact that in this country, if you are wealthy, if you have friends in high places, you have a leg up when you face a court. I mean, it is what it is. But, and now we're here. Just other, yeah. Excuse me. Boy, there. Oh, I'll repeat the question. The question is, if in fact Trump were to declare martial law, what additional power and authority would that give him? Too much is the easy answer. I have been reading that you know, he had asked Pam Bondi, who, I won't go there. Certainly not my ideal of a attorney general, and someone else in his weird administration, to look into the whether it would be legal for him to impose martial law. And from what I'm hearing is they have said, no, he shouldn't do that. I think that is probably a reaction to the massive protests that we've seen, rather than, since their analyses of law have certainly differed from mine and from many other people's. But if that were to happen, it would really be the coup of the coup, because what we're seeing right now is an attempted coup, an attempt to ignore the Constitution and to act as monarchs and autocrats do. That sort of declaration would sort of be the cherry on the top of that. At that point, we all take to the streets. You know, it's not a good time, people. Anyway. Other questions? Yeah. Every bit of that and anything else we can think of. Yeah, there's a type of pundit that likes to say, oh, well, protests, I think, are incredibly important, and the reason they are, and the reason that those letters are, and the reason that my sisters protested at Todd Young's place, what we need to do is encourage the invertebrates in Congress, the Republicans who are saying, okay, you take, you know, okay, we're not going to object to your takeover of legal authority that is actually ours, to make at least enough of those people uncomfortable enough that they find or grow a spine. Because right now, the House of Representatives is very thinly in the Republican, is very thinly Republican. And if 4 or 5 of the Republicans from districts that are not gerrymandered to be deep red were to suddenly find those spines, it would make a huge difference. Similarly, in the Senate, we are a very divided country right now. There's not an overwhelming, Republican or Democratic majority in either of those houses. So, to me, the most important object of these protests and the letters and the turnout is to send a message. Here in Indiana, we have 2 senators. Banks is pathetic. He's a Christian nationalist idiot. But Todd Young clearly knows better. He's just a coward. And if we can send him a message that says, listen, your cowardice isn't going to protect you, that would be very helpful. In other states where the electorate is not so overwhelmingly Republican, there are senators and Congress people who have to really be concerned about keeping their seats. And again, those protests and those letters and those phone calls send a message, and the message has to be, look, if you stand up for what is correct, if you honor your oath, we will return you to your congressional or senatorial seat. But if you don't, we won't. To me, that's the biggest hope we have. And that's where turning out, I know there's going to be a massive protest on a Thursday, which is May 1st, May Day. I'm taking my granddaughter and we're going to the State House, but whenever you can participate, do. Yeah. I have always been an opponent of term limits. The notion that we can impose term limits on the Supreme Court of 18 years is a different issue, because that still would protect them against the kinds of political pressure that the founders were worried about. The problem with term limits, as with so many easy answers to complicated problems, is when someone gets elected to, let's say, the House, they go to Washington and they don't know where the bathroom is. They don't know. I used to say the pencil sharpener, but we don't have those anymore. How many of you remember pencil sharpener? No, never mind. The people who they then hire people who are the staff members who tell the congressperson, this is coming up for a vote, this is the way this works, this is the way that works. If you have term limits, say 2 terms for a congressperson, which would be 4 years, by the time they figure out where the bathroom is, or the pencil sharpener, depending, they're gone. And so all of the authority really passes to these unelected, unknown staff people. And it's bad enough that we don't get rid of bad congressmen, but at least we know who they are. And if we ever got our own spines back, we could get rid of them. But you don't know who the folks on the staff are. And so I think I understand the concern that but we do have term limits. It's called go to the ballot box and cast a vote. The biggest problem we have politically in this country are the people who don't vote. I mean, if there's anything that we should have learned by this time we're experiencing, it is that people who do not discharge their civic obligations and go to the polls are the reason for our problems. I mean, as angry as I get, and I get angry, at the cult that has taken over what used to be my political party. For those of you who don't know, I was a Republican until 2000. I ran for Congress as a Republican in 1980, and I was pro-choice and pro-gay rights, and I won a Republican primary. That would never happen today because what was a party is now a cult, and it's a very racist cult for that matter. But, you know, even the members of that cult at least are going to the polls and casting a ballot. They're participating, not in a way that I'm particularly excited about, but the people who stayed home are the people who elected what we've got right now. So anybody who has somebody in your family who does not vote, well, hurt them. Anyway, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think the order was okay. I mean, the order said, hey, facilitate this, get this done. I mean, maybe we would have used different language, but it was clear. The scariest thing right now to me, as a recovered lawyer, is the likelihood that Trump will ignore court orders. And if you remember your history lesson, Jackson, when the Supreme Court issued an order that he didn't like because it was going to keep him from killing Indians, said, well, the court has issued its decision, now let them enforce it. You know, the courts don't have armies. What they have had up till now are norms of democracy that everybody has felt impelled to follow. And we've got, excuse me, an insane individual in the White House who I don't think would recognize reality if he fell over it, and does not feel that he needs to abide by court decisions. And at such time as the Supreme Court says, do X, and he says no, that's going to be, I mean, that's a pivot point. I don't know what happens then. I wish I could be helpful. I'm not. I'm terrible. Yeah.
I just saw Vance on TV quoted that exact situation, and I didn't know, and I'm asking, what happened to Jackson?
Nothing. He went ahead and, as I recall, and boy, I'm old and I don't recall well, but the Trail of Tears occurred, and you know, but we did survive that. I'm not sure today, given the environment that we all inhabit, especially the information environment, which is a big part of our problem, because if you want to, I used to teach a course called Media and Public Affairs, and I would tell my students, if you really believe that the aliens landed in Roswell, I can find you 5 internet sites with pictures of the aliens. You know? I mean, if you want to curate a reality that you prefer to live in, you can do that today in ways that we've not been able to do it before. There is a substantial media ecosystem that simply supports anything that Trump says, and that his cabinet. I will tell you all, you know, the racism that has that really has promoted the current cult that believes that white skin is a marker of superiority. All you have to do is look at Trump's cabinet, and that'll take care of that. I mean, white skin in that cabinet doesn't even denote a minimal competence, let alone superiority. But you know, it is difficult when you live in a world where someone is simply oblivious to fact, and who can go out and find do their own research, sort of like Kennedy, our current health. Never mind. Okay. I mean, you know, I choose to believe this, and therefore it must be true. Yeah. Oh. If I had an answer to that, I would be so happy. I mean, I will tell you that my youngest son, who's a lawyer here, has 2 kids in college, and he's telling them, don't come back to Indiana. You know, at some point, perhaps, the people who go to the polls like robots and pull a lever because it has an R by its name are going to wake up to the fact that we can't we don't get people new employment here because we've got a brain drain that is getting worse because I won't say it, our legislature, which I have often referred to as the world's worst legislature, is involved in a war against the universities, a war against public education. Well, when people move to a place, they look for good schools. They look for when a factory is looking to relocate, they look for an educated workforce. I mean, all of the things that are coming out of our state house right now, and I won't even dignify the lieutenant governor. I mean, he is, I won't go there. But all of those kinds of things are giving Indiana a terrible name. I mean, okay, Beckwith's idiocy on the 3/5 issue made the Washington Post. So it's not just those of us in central Indiana who look at the legislature and say, where did these people come from? You know, and I'm sorry, a lot of them came from southern Indiana, rural Indiana, and our problem here in Indiana, this is my hot button issue, I'm sorry you started it, is gerrymandering. We are one of the 5 most gerrymandered states in the country, and the Republican Party has drafted or redistricted, drawn district lines in a way that even when you're looking at, for example, Indianapolis or other urban areas, they take a slice of the urban area and marry it to a larger slice of the rural portion. And so whoever gets elected from that district is more responsive to the rural population, and it's the rural population that votes these people in. Yeah, there are some places that they can't get that done, but and it will be interesting, assuming again that we still have a country and a world and all that. It will be interesting to see as our rural population empties out, how long they can keep that up. But the extreme gerrymandering that has given us a very unrepresentative state legislature is passing insane bills. I mean, we won't even talk about the abortion ban, which is emptying out our medical community. There are these huge medical deserts in parts of Indiana now because doctors don't want to practice here for good reason. So, I mean, yeah, Indiana is trying very hard to be Mississippi. And we're succeeding. This is really getting depressing. Yeah. Well, there's two parts of that. The last one, I mean, he's not going to live till 2028, and the sooner the better. But I'm sorry. Anyway, I mean, he's an old man, and he's declining before our eyes, and the bar wasn't high to start with. But the whole business of a constitutional convention scares the living daylights out of me, because the people who would encourage that and I mean, if we had a sane electorate, it might be time to look into some, let's take a look at like the Second Amendment. But right now, that would be an invitation to the cult, and it would be terrifying. So and of course our legislature is looking into that because of course they are, anyway, yeah. Yeah. I was on the legislative study committee that was put together a couple of years ago to look at redistricting, and that's when I realized, and I will tell you that every time that legislative subcommittee met, our study committee, sorry, 300 and 400 people from around Indiana came, and they were all against gerrymandering. And did it make any difference? No. The problem we have in Indiana is that the only people who can change gerrymandering are the people who benefit from it. So my long-term desire, assuming we have a long-term, I'm getting really depressed. If we had, as many states do, either a referendum or an initiative where citizens could, that's the way other states have gotten rid of their gerrymandering. They've gone to a nonpartisan redistricting committee because there was a referendum and they changed their, I think first we have to try to get a referendum or an initiative, some way that will make our legislature have to listen to their constituents, which right now they don't. They don't have to, and they don't listen. And it's incredibly frustrating. But we're never going to get rid of gerrymandering. Well, one of two things will happen. One of three things, but the third is the planet goes up in smoke. Either we finally get a referendum and use that as our way to get gerrymandering stopped, or all of this really stupid stuff that the legislature's doing, which is hollowing out the state, will hollow out the rural areas so much that they won't be able to get enough votes in those rural areas to overcome the urban areas. Now, who knows how long that will take, but that would be the only non-legislative fix that I can see on the horizon. It's sad. Yeah. I, boy, if I wish I was smarter. Uh, you know, I went to the Saturday protests, and there were thousands of people there. I'm going to go on Thursday, I'll see, but on Thursday, a lot of people work and can't go to a protest, you know. So I think those are the elements that people like Indivisible, pardon me, groups like Indivisible have to balance. How do you schedule things so that people who are really angry can participate, but, you know, and perhaps it doesn't have the same effect as when you're in their face, so to speak. Again, it's way past my expertise. Yeah. Sure. Mm. I don't disagree with that at all, but I also don't want us to discount the importance of the showing up, because I think there's a very interesting scholar at Harvard who studies changing what sorts of public protest, what kinds of public action, I guess is the better term, eventually make for regime change. And what she has found is that if 3.5% of the population of a country are in the resistance, and that includes all of what you've said, it's not just protesting, but it's also important to protest because that's obvious and it's big, and you know, and eventually even the Star will cover it, maybe. You know, but 3.5% of the population will will generate in her studies regime change. Now, that sounds small, but I think it comes out to like 11 million people. So, I mean, it's a lot of people. But I think demonstrating that there are millions of people who are unhappy and want change is incredibly important, and you do it in all of those ways. And definitely work on campaigns. On the other hand, I hope we have elections, and anyway. Getting back to his question about martial law. So, anyway, yeah. Oh. Well, take a look at what this administration is going after. They're going after public radio, they're going after the elite universities, they're going after accurate information. And I mean, I mentioned before that our information environment is different than it has ever been. We've always, back in Jefferson's day, there were pamphlets, and there's always been crazy people, I mean, there's always been Robert Kennedy Jr.'s, brainworms, whatever. But there has never been a time when you can just click on something and go to sources of, quote, information that may or may not be accurate. Well, long term, if we have long term, what we need is to teach kids how to understand what is credible and what is not on the internet. How do you just, and now with deep fakes, which is the ability of artificial intelligence to create pictures, and they could do a replica of me that you would not be able to tell the difference. How do you know whether what you are seeing in these various sites is accurate, or whether it has been invented? I mean, we live in a really scary time when it comes to the ability to trust what information we are getting. And there are some really, I think, excellent efforts being made right now to create studies for students that help them make those, to distinguish between what is credible and what is not. But we're really in a lot of uncharted territory with that. And then you get back to when, this administration would love to get rid of NPR, and, because it's trusted and because it's vetted and accurate. And it's just, I wish I had answers to these questions. I just share your concerns. Yeah. Can't hear. Oh. Yeah. It's even worse than that. And the scuttlebutt on that is that President Whitten wanted it because she wasn't getting along with the alumni representatives. But the assault on Indiana universities it started last session with the ridiculous, we want to ensure intellectual diversity on your campus. And I just read that there is a professor of German studies who is being investigated for lack of, I don't know, whatever, because a student who was, the student did not need to give his name. A student issued a complaint. Well, anybody who's ever taught at a university, anytime you give somebody a grade that they don't like, they're going to complain. I may be the only person you've ever met who was sued in a small claims court for giving a student a B-. I am happy to report that that lawsuit did not succeed. But I mean, you know, you're always going to be the whole purpose of that law and a couple that have passed in this session is to chill the intellectual atmosphere on a university campus. What ought to happen on a university campus, and doesn't often enough, frankly, is students should be allowed to look into all sorts of things and to play with different ideas and to discuss and debate without worrying that somebody is looking over their shoulder and deciding that they're anti-American. I mean, this focus on universities, which is national, it's not just Indiana, but of course we're at the front, because we want to be Mississippi. But the whole point of it is to turn our institutions of higher education into institutions that turn out worker bees who are amenable to whatever government tells them. And that is not education. One of my many hot button issues is our legislature clearly does not understand what education is and what it isn't. They always are talking about turning out people for, you know, jobs. They think job training and education are the same thing, and they are not. And to the extent that these assaults on our higher education institutions are covered up with, well, we're just trying to, you know, create a workplace environment, that is just, it's a term that I won't use in a church, but let's just say it's not credible. Yeah. Can't hear. I'm sorry, what? Oh, why tenure? Oh, tenure is protection of the First Amendment rights of professors. If a professor can be fired for an opinion that is not the opinion of the regime in power at the time, then there is no intellectual freedom on a university campus. And the whole point of tenure is not to protect professors who are lazy or whatever. It is to protect the right of professors to their own intellectual integrity. And when you damage tenure, which these laws that our legislature has passed have done, what you're really doing is sending a message that you'd better shut up. I mean, I during my time at the university, I noticed that young professors who did not yet have tenure were frequently afraid to speak up in faculty meetings and say something that they thought might offend the dean. I was an old person when I went to the university, and I have a big mouth, so that never bothered me. But once they got tenure and they knew that they couldn't be arbitrarily dismissed because they held a position, and it might be a position just on the way in which that department was being run. I mean, we're not talking only politics. Then things got a lot better. Tenure is an incredibly important asset to the intellectual environment of a university. Yeah. I'm, oh, yeah, we don't have there is no legal mechanism to have a referendum in Indiana. We don't have, there's no authority for one. In fact, it took, this is one of my pet peeves, when Indianapolis wanted to expand our bus service, and we wanted to have a referendum just of the people who would pay the extra tax. It took 3 sessions at the General Assembly to get permission to ask ourselves if we wanted to have transit and were willing to pay for it. We had to get a special law passed that allowed us to have that limited referendum. Without, there is not now any authority in Indiana law for a citizen referendum. I'm not sure you should have come here. It's not a good, it just, yeah. Exactly.
We live in a state that is predominantly led by Republicans, and the only way that we're going to get referendum here in Indiana is to change that and get a Democratic leadership, or at least a ballot.
Yeah, yes.
You know, and without that, we're not going to get that. But we can't get that because we're in a gerrymandered state.
Yeah. No, you have exactly explained the situation. But that gets back to the point made that we need to get behind people who are running for Congress, who are for the state legislature, who are rational and who actually want to listen to their constituents, and not to Lieutenant Governor Beckwith. I'm done if you guys are done. Okay, one more. Well, for one thing, every person, the Constitution says every person is entitled to due process. So I don't care if you're an undocumented person, whoever you are entitled to due process under the Constitution. There are limits. People who are not citizens don't have the same panoply of rights as citizens do, but there are basic rights that everybody under the jurisdiction of the United States has, and somebody needs to tell the president, but anyway. Yeah. Oh yeah, well, a lot of things get debated on social media. When I scroll through my Facebook, if I answered everybody that I saw, I wouldn't do anything else. Yeah, there's one of the things that I worked very hard on when I was at the university. We have terrible levels of civic literacy in this country. I mean, the data is very depressing. It's not just your local kids. I noticed that Tommy Tuberville, or whatever his name is, didn't know that there were 3 branches of government, and he was now part of one. The dumbing down is kind of scary. But we need to really beef up civics education in the high. There is a wonderful program called We the People. Anybody familiar with that? We the People is a curriculum that when kids go through that, they are, first of all, there's data that shows that anybody who's been through that is much more likely to vote throughout their life, but they learn about but it is a totally voluntary curriculum. If you've got a teacher in a local high school who's willing to do the extra work, the Bar Foundation, the Indiana Bar Foundation, sponsors seminars for those teachers and works on it. But the kids who go through that, if We the People was mandatory in every high school in this country, it would be a different country and it would be better, because people would understand their obligations as citizens. They would understand that we have 3 branches of government and that all 3 ought to be operating. We really have allowed too many generations to just ignore the citizenship aspects of, and getting back to our wonderful legislature and its assault on education, well, I won't go there. Anyway, thank you.